Plainfield, Wisconsin, November 1957. A beloved figure in the community goes missing, and the search for her would culminate in the discovery of one of the most grotesque horror scenes imaginable. The revelation sent shockwaves through the town, shattering their perception of a quiet neighborhood they thought they knew. The legacy of this crime would go on to influence popular horror films like Psycho, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Silence of the Lambs. I'm Art Intel, and this is the story of Ed Gein. It's November 16, 1957, the first day of deer hunting season. The Warden Hardware Store is a popular place in town to buy things often needed in the rural farming community of Plainfield, Wisconsin. The store is run by Bernice Warden, a well-known figure in the community. She is alone in the store on this day, and most of the men in town are out hunting. One man, however, has a different plan. He knows Bernice and enters the store to buy some antifreeze. While inside at the counter, he asks Bernice if he can see a rifle in the case behind her. Bernice turns around to open the case and is shot in the back of the head and killed instantly. The killer then drags her body to his truck outside, loads her body in the bed of his truck, and drives off, all in broad daylight with no witnesses. Hours later, Bernice's son Frank arrives at the store. He walks in to find the place empty and notices a trail of blood leading out the door. Frank immediately suspected a known man in the area who had developed an obsession with Bernice. He was often seen hanging around the store and trying to court her. The police arrive, and while investigating the scene, they discovered a receipt for antifreeze made out to the man Frank suspected of the crime. His name was Ed Gein, a 51-year-old man who lived alone, worked diligently on his farm, and was often seen visiting his dead mother's grave. He was an odd man, somewhat quiet and reserved, who was also helpful to some of the neighbors in the community.
The citizens of Plainfield could not have imagined what was about to unfold in their small community. The revelations soon to be discovered would leave them in disbelief and expose a scene of unimaginable horror.
Gein was quickly arrested by police, and a search of his farm would begin that night. With flashlights in hand, they searched the property starting outside. Coming from the inside of what was referred to at the time as a summer kitchen shack, the officers detected a distinct odor. When they entered, they saw what at first they thought was a butchered animal hanging from the rafters. They quickly realized that it was the body of Bernice Warden. The search quickly expanded and moved into the house, where a host of other horrors were discovered.
The people of Plainfield had no idea that Ed Gein had been leading a disturbing life alone on his farm. His descent into madness has a lot of momentous events that seem to have contributed to his decline.
The home was filled with trash, as well as objects and furniture crafted from human remains. Chairs and lampshades made of human skin, 12 human heads, gloves made of human fingers sewn together, jars of human noses and eyes, boxes of female genitalia, and a belt made of female nipples were among the objects discovered. It was a home filled with gruesome relics of human dismemberment. The scene was described by residents in the area as breathtakingly shocking.
Ed Gein exhibited a complex and disturbed personality characterized by a variety of psychological factors. Gein displayed traits commonly associated with psychotypal personality disorder marked by peculiar beliefs, eccentric behavior, and social isolation. His motivation to rob graves and create human skin suits can be attributed to a combination of factors, including a deep-seated desire for control and a distorted sense of identity. Gein's actions reflect a profound psychological disturbance rooted in his need to possess and manipulate the physical remains of others, potentially stemming from unresolved developmental issues, trauma, and an impaired ability to establish healthy interpersonal relationships. This behavior illustrates a disturbed sense of self and a desperate attempt to satisfy his psychological needs through the macabre acts of grave robbing and creating human suits.
Ed Gein was born in 1906 in La Crosse, Wisconsin. His family moved to Plainfield in 1914 when he was just 8 years old. His mother, Augusta, was a strict Christian who isolated Ed and his brother Henry from the rest of the town, feeling everyone else outside of the family was a sinful influence. Ed's father was an alcoholic who took a very passive role in the family, dominated by the matriarch Augusta. Ed dropped out of school at 12 to work exclusively on the family farm, further isolating him and contributing to his later heinous acts. In April 1940, George, Ed's father, passed away. This left Ed, his mother, and his brother Henry alone in the family and on the farm. Soon, other events would drive Ed further into isolation and madness.
Ed adored his mother, Augusta. He worshipped her. She could do no wrong in his eyes. Augusta kept a very tight leash on her boys their whole life, used fear and manipulation to control them. Henry, though, was beginning to recognize this and breaking away from her influence after their father's death, and that caused a real rift between the brothers.
In May 1944, the Geins were hit with another tragedy when Henry, Ed's brother, passed away as a result of a heart attack during a brush fire. There were suspicious circumstances surrounding the death, however, including bruises on Henry's head. These discoveries later led to speculation that Ed had perhaps killed him as well. Ed was working as a handyman at the time, doing odd jobs around the community. He and his mother now lived alone together on the farm, and the bond between them grew even stronger.
Ed idolized his mother, and she was essentially the only female influence he had in his entire life. Now, she was the only thing left in his life, and in 1945, everything went completely off the rails for him.
Shortly after Henry's death, Augusta had a stroke. Ed stayed by her bedside and nursed her diligently every day. She began to recover and get stronger. She never fully recovered, however, and in December 1945, Augusta died and was laid to rest. His mother's death devastated Ed. He cried and whined uncontrollably at her funeral. He was now completely isolated, and his life would take a very dark turn. Unable to cope with the loss of his mother, Ed would try to recreate her. This led to a series of crimes culminating in the murder of Bernice Worden.
His growth and social development were stunted by Augusta's controlling personality, so Ed was ill-equipped to deal with her loss. Instead, he became obsessed with bringing her back and recreating the world he and his mother shared prior to her death.
Despite his dark path to the local community, he remained a strange but friendly and helpful neighbor. Over the next 12 years, he would live a life of derangement, spinning out of control into a world of psychosis that few can relate to. Gein began engrossing himself more and more into pornography and medical textbooks. He developed a particular interest in Ilse Koch, a Nazi concentration camp worker who collected patches of prisoners' skin. This obsession, combined with his skills in slaughtering and preparing animal carcasses, led to a terrifying fusion of reality and fantasy. Among the items found on Gein's property were human faces made into masks hanging on the wall, and a suit made of human female skin. Gein confessed to wearing the suit at night and wandering around the farm outside pretending to be his mother.
The discoveries at Ed Gein's farm in 1957 opened a can of worms for investigators who soon discovered that one of the face masks was that of Mary Hogan, another missing woman.
Mary Hogan had disappeared 3 years prior. She was the local tavern keeper, and Gein was even heard making offhand comments at the time about her being at his farm. Due to his eccentric behavior, however, no one took him seriously at the time. During his interrogation, Gein confessed to the killings of Bernice Worden and Mary Hogan. There were multiple other bodies and corpses found on the property as well. Police believed they had a serial killer on their hands, and his lack of empathy for his victims went with the theory. That would not be the case, however, and the actions of Ed Gein would turn out to be far more macabre. Gein was actually a grave robber who started his collection in the very cemetery where his mother was buried. 2 years after her death, Gein began robbing graves. Unlike traditional grave robbers, however, Gein was not interested in valuable objects found on the bodies. He was interested in the bodies themselves.
What began as a morbid fascination confined to the pages of books had manifested into a horrifying reality within the walls of his home. Ed Gein's actions were a morbid attempt to resurrect his mother, the woman he was completely tied to for his sense of identity.
Between 1947 and 1952, Gein frequently visited the local cemetery at night and exhumed freshly buried bodies. He was solely interested in the bodies of middle-aged and elderly women who resembled his mother. He confessed to stealing 9 corpses, but 12 heads were found at Gein's house, suggesting there were more victims than he confessed to. Examination of the graves revealed that they had indeed been broken into. Evidence showed that Gein had even tried to break into his own mother's grave, but because it was sealed in cement, he could not penetrate. In 1957, Ed Gein was charged with the murder of Bernice Wharton. He pleaded not guilty due to insanity and was sent to the Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane in Waupun, Wisconsin. 11 years later, he was deemed fit to stand trial and was convicted of the murder. He was committed to a mental hospital to serve his sentence, where he stayed until his death in 1984. Ed Gein was buried next to his mother in the very same graveyard he desecrated. This farm that was set to be auctioned off in 1958 mysteriously burned to the ground, preventing the property from becoming a macabre tourist attraction. The people of Plainfield have tried to move on from the events surrounding Ed Gein. His farm burning to the ground was seen as a relief for many of them. His actions and persona, however, have continued to live on in horror films and psychotic cinematic characters he inspired. Pieces from his grave and memorabilia from the case were among the first of its kind to be sold online, creating an entirely new challenge for law enforcement in our society in dealing with victims' rights. What do you think? Is there another psychotic killer in American history that has had a greater impact on society? Let me know below in the comments. If you have any information related to the case, let me know as well. References are available in the description. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button and consider subscribing to the channel. Where in case you forgot, I'm Martin Till. Thanks for watching.